Hi, this is Emily of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Jessica Hammer, co-host of Crowned and Dangerous here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Crowned and Dangerous, where Maddie and I talk about all things pageant related, especially our experiences in the Miss America organization. A new show comes out bi-weekly, every other Thursday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Crowned and Dangerous. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
I don't know the next words to that. I never know the words to songs though.
I don't either. I just sing, and I don't even sing along them right. People are like, "What are you singing?" I was like, "I know you know the song." It goes bye bye bye, and they're like, "No, in sync. It's like the easiest thing to sing." And why can't what? It's like, you know what? It's okay.
Why can't you sing bye bye bye?
Hey,
I don't know. I can't. Hi, Sarah. How's it going? Hello.
Right? Cool. So here we are. We are in episode 10. This has been quite an adventure. How you feeling about it, Nikki?
Oh man, Sarah. I mean, first of all, like selfishly getting to spend a lot of time with you has been fantastic. Because for those of you who don't know, like Sarah and I, we knew each other, but we've really had to get to know each other. We took like personality profiles before we started working together. We laid a bunch of groundwork and we set rules and expectations, and we did our strengths and our weaknesses, and we did all of this huge amount of homework before we ever even really agreed to do a podcast. And then we got to a point where we just like had to push the baby bird off the cliff, and that was Disarming Disability that we pushed off this cliff.
Yeah.
And after we pushed it off the cliff, we've just been kind of trying to fly, and it has been super rewarding / so exhausting. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely exhausting. And it's like every week there is all of these little details. And because we want to produce good content, and it's not just recording. It's not just calling someone and having a 45-minute conversation with them. It's all of the legwork building the relationship in order to be able to even ask that person if they want to come on and talk to us, and then developing all the questions and how we want to outline the conversation with them. But then it's also like transcribing episodes that takes a long time, and coming up with discussion questions and making sure that we're being really intentional about what we are producing. And that it's not like, yes, it is a podcast, but it's larger than actually recording and putting that out, because it's not just that. And learning what are all those little details that need to be taken and done sort of in between. So I'm learning a lot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's been really, really fun and scary. And just like you said, like both, the thing that we have in common is we both, well, there's a couple things. We do way too much.
Yes.
We do way too much because we feel so passionately about the message that we have and the words that we want to share. So we're just juggling lots of personal projects, but that's great because we're both investing in a lot of our different identities. And I think we need to in order to be balanced human beings.
Right.
But, you know, we're fighting with actual full-time jobs or full-time school or whatever it is. So it's been amazing. And I know that we'll talk more about this once we get to our final episode, when we actually are deconstructing and talking about what season 2 will look like. And already in this season, there are so many things that were like, great, in season 2, we're going to do it this way. Like that's such a common way that we talk to each other now, which is fun too. It's fun to be in a space where we're close enough to the first finish line where we'll be able to like regroup, make things better, and like fly again, or like be pushed off a different cliff.
Right.
Yeah. So it's good, but it's exhausting, and real life happens, man. Real life happens. And so I don't know. That's how I'm feeling. What about you? How are you feeling?
I feel I feel very similarly. I also reflect back on, I think it was in our first couple of episodes where we were really talking about what we want to do with this and why we're doing it and what we believe in. And there was a moment where you're like, this is what Sarah and I have been doing, where this is what we've been spending our free time on. And I think that that's really important, that like all of this is our free time. And again, all of our personal projects, like this isn't the only thing that I'm doing. And I'm sure you've had messages like this too. I had a friend text me. She's like, oh my God, you did this and you did this and you did this and you're in field work and you're living in a new city. And she's like, do you ever sleep? And I was like, no, I mean, like I don't. And then trying to remember to like actually take time for myself to take care of my body and like do fun things with friends that has no other like larger impact, meaning for society other than just enjoying time alone and enjoying time with people that I love, and not feeling all stressed out with all my little to-do lists, because those are all my projects that I took on. So I'm sure.
Yeah, I definitely feel that sense of, it's weird because yet again, this like fire that we keep talking about, that we've let this light that's turned on in both of us, it gives you this huge sense of responsibility. Like, I feel like I have this responsibility to be doing something like this. Like if it wasn't a podcast, it would be some other version of what we're doing. And so that responsibility is a really real feeling to me. And it's hard because you want to like fulfill that responsibility or find ways that you're feeling like you're connecting to the community while also, you know, like having a beer with your friends on Friday night and not feeling guilty because you're not transcribing episodes.
And I really think that that's what helps all those late nights and all those early mornings, is that we just believe in this so much. So that helps kind of drive and push us forward, which is fun.
It's been a ride, man. It has been a ride. We're not done yet, so we're not there quite yet.
But we're getting close. And I think it's important to take moments of like, look at where we've come. And I think that self-reflection is really important through all stages of this. I think self-reflection in general is really important in all stages of all of this. So it's important to take a moment and be appreciative of where we come, and appreciative of what we created, and knowing how we can do it differently for next time, but not getting hung up on like, oh, well, if we had just done this, or if this has just happened. Because I think it's really easy to get stuck in those circles and those sort of like cycles, or those scripts in our minds. So it's good to come out of that. So yes, we are doing it. It's also summer's coming, so I'm just really excited to be out of the winter and sort of just really looking forward to what summer brings, and just places of joy and happiness in change.
I totally and change. Life is changing. Yeah, so cool. Well, should we move on and introduce our guest?
Yes.
All right, let's hop into it. Let's waste no more time. Here we go.
Luca Badetti is a doctor in disability studies with a background in clinical psychology and theology. Luca promotes individual and community growth holistically and inclusively. He teaches at Loyola University and Chicago's Institute of Pastoral Studies and DePaul University's Peace, Justice, and Conflict Study programs. He is involved with l'Arche, communities of shared life between people with and without intellectual disabilities, and he has given a TED Talk based on his community experience called Embrace Your Inabilities. More info on Luca's background may be found at lucabadetti.com.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Luca, how has your week been?
Hello, the week has been going pretty well. I'm currently in Rome. I came back here in January. I was in Chicago just before. So it's been a good week so far.
That's fabulous. I'm very jealous. I wish I was in Rome right now. That sounds very wonderful. Okay, Luca, so for today, you're going to talk to us about sort of the relationship in being an ally. So let's just open up and go right into it. What does it mean to be an ally for people with disabilities?
Well, to me, I've discovered the disability world through meeting individuals with disabilities and becoming a friend. So entering into mutual friendships. And from there, I got to know disability culture, the disability population, the needs of the disability world. So to be an ally, I think is to, at least that's one way of understanding it, is to recognize the needs of people with disabilities and to advocate for them and to journey alongside people with disabilities.
I know in one of the TED Talks that I watched of you, which we'll put that link on our website too, so you can see it there. I know in the TED Talk you had spoken about this, our inabilities, and that everyone has an inability, that there are things that we are unable to do and require help for doing. Can you talk a little bit about that, sort of in your experience in being an ally?
Well, first of all, the choice of inabilities was, I think, relevant because it's something that we can all relate to. Basically, we all have abilities and we all have inabilities. There is some disagreement as to whether we're all disabled or not. Some people say no, absolutely not, because, we don't want to diminish the experience of people with specific physical and intellectual disabilities if we start saying that we're all disabled. While some people are more towards we all have disabilities, but they often seem to actually mean inabilities when they say that. Although it's also true that disability, I think it's becoming more and more of a fluid identity in some ways. Many of us can identify as disabled, maybe, as we age or as we experience different things. So I think the term disability now is used in a more fluid way. But anyway, in living in community with people with intellectual disabilities, I really sort of saw with my own eyes how we all need one another. So it's not just people with disabilities needing the help of people without disabilities or vice versa. It's about mutual relationships, So to me, meeting people with disabilities was about entering into friendship when I first started living in L'Arche, which is a community in which people with and without intellectual disabilities live together in a spirit of belonging. And that has impacted me deeply. And I've learned a lot from that experience, both about being a friend and being an ally.
Well, and I think it's really important, this concept of being a friend, and that you are in this, words that I heard were like mutual relationship with someone, that you are equals in that relationship, and that it's not someone who is like, here, I'm going to be your ally, I have all the answers, I have all these capabilities, and I'm going to help you, person with a disability, because you're sort of this like under person in our society. So like, look, I'm wonderful and I'm giving you these things and I need to be praised on how wonderful I am. Because that's not the narrative that we want. And that's not the power differential that we're seeking either. And I think that what you're saying about that mutual friendship, that equality, that it's like these are two people and these friendships exist and they're beautiful, where you do have that equality there.
Also because, when we say ally to, the people with disabilities, there is a profound beauty there in regards to awareness and sensitivity and journeying with. It can be easy to stay outside of the group if we just say, well, I care about disability issues, okay. But I think when we become friends, there is an actual involvement and a relationship that happens in which it's not just a people, a group, but it's also individuals with their own specific needs and their own stories and their own desires and needs and wants. So yes, I'm an ally of people with disabilities, but I'm also a friend of Tom, Jimmy, Sarah, etc., etc.
Can you speak a little bit more about some of these relationships that you've had?
So I discovered about large, which is a French word for the ARC, because this movement of community was started in France. They're now all over the world. I felt I wanted community. And there was something special about this community in which day-to-day life, was lived in like very simple way. And so I went. I remember my first visit, I just went with one of the core members. That's how people with disabilities are called in large in the English-speaking world. Core, because they're at the heart of community. Mm-hmm. I mean, the first time I went to visit, I went with a core member and a house coordinator, grocery shop. And, many people other organizations might have different types of orientations, so to speak, when new people arrive. Well, I was just visiting. But, going to the supermarket, is such a simple thing, but you're doing it together. And that's really important, It changes the experience. So even going grocery shopping, was something that can be shared. I've learned a lot from people with intellectual disabilities about what it means to be human. I think we are such a society that is a bit obsessed with intellectual power, and it excludes people that it deems not smart enough or not quick enough or not productive enough, et cetera, And we see this a lot, with older people with dementia, et cetera, that they're kind of outside of the social cultural milieu, And I think at the heart of being human is not just, reason, but the heart, living in relationship. People with intellectual disabilities have helped me see this. I still remember one day I was away for vacation and I came back to the house where I was living, and the core member who is a friend of mine and who has Down syndrome, as soon as I came in, he welcomed me, gave me a hug, and he looked at me in the eyes and he said, "Did you miss me? Did I miss him while I was gone?" And there was such a vulnerability and honesty in that statement. That is just one example of how living in community can really sort of bring us together and make us feel that we are an important part of a bigger whole, in which both people with intellectual disabilities and without are important.
I'm in school to be an occupational therapist as well. So I know things that we talk about all of the time in occupational therapy is people engaging in their meaningful activities. And going back to grocery shopping, like that is a daily task that people need to do and want to do and enjoy doing or don't like doing. Regardless, that's an aspect of daily living, and that all people, have rights to enjoy and engage in all of those parts of daily living, whatever that looks like, and to whatever degree people are able and want to be able to engage in those different types of things. And I think that it's easy to see, and I know even in my own life, and when people see my hand and then they start asking a lot of questions and they're like, "Oh, well, how do you do your hair? How do you do this? How do you do this?" And you're like, well, like, I do them. I don't just sit in my room and like wait for people to do them for me. And like, yes, sometimes I drop stuff, or sometimes it's clunky, or sometimes I need to, do 10 extra steps to do things. But it just is this interesting, because we don't see a lot of disability in our media, and we don't know the social scripts around it overall as a society, that we sort of assume because we're not seeing it, we can't imagine what it can look like. And that we think that people are sort of just this recipients of care, sort of unable to do a lot of things. And that's so not true. And that, yes, people with disabilities are going grocery shopping, and they are playing games with their friends, and they are sitting around and eating dinner and helping to make dinner, and that these are all opportunities that people can meaningfully engage in things in their lives, and then that helps develop those meaningful relationships and those real friendships that all of us want to do and can do and are capable of doing. And that like capacity for love isn't limited to people who are able-bodied, if you will, but those are things that we all have access to do, and it can look different amongst different people, but we still all have the ability to do so.
You mentioned an important word, which is enjoyment. People have often tried to change people with disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities. Well, you should learn more, you should do this way, you should act that way, you should behave that way, blah, blah, blah. And yes, we want people to grow in their skills, to help people achieve, what they want, et cetera, et cetera. And I think friendship brings that element of also enjoying time together. So I remember one of the core members, we used to go drive. I mean, I used to drive and we just used to go on a ride and listen to music, because it's something that we enjoy doing together,
But yes, in that component of friendship, and I think even the word friendship, similarly to the word partner, shares that equality and mutual respect and understanding for the other person and that level. And again, just sort of reiterating that aspect of equality too, which I think is important. And that these relationships are real and exist and are important.
We also have to be honest and aware of power dynamics and differences. Mm-hmm. You bring in the issue of power. It's really important. When people use the words like, we're like a family or we're all friends, etc., hopefully, yes, as long as that doesn't hide what can be or what are, power imbalances,
Do you have ways to sort of appropriately navigate power imbalances?
A first step and a really important step is to be aware of those. When people say that awareness can bring about change, for some people are not aware of them. They don't see them. For some people, it's like they're so steeped in power dynamics that they cannot see a whole lot from the outside sort of thing, or kind of, distance themselves from them a little bit. I think once we become aware of them and are even able to talk about them, I think change can happen there. But often you might need training or someone to help you see that, because if people are too immersed in them, they might not be able to see them right away.
That reminds me of a book that I'm reading right now. It's called Counseling People with Disfigurement, that was written by Eileen Bradbury. And she talks a lot about this aspect of helping and sort of who the helper is and what the helper role is. And it's not the responsibility of the helper to come in and solve things. And it's the responsibility of the helper and the person who is receiving help to join in this mutual agreement of what help is needed that's derived from the individual who wants the help and the individual who's able to provide the help. But it's this mutual relationship. They talk about like scaffolding and structuring the relationship so that expectations are managed on both ends and they know what that looks like. And the helper is there to help the person achieve the components that they want to achieve. So the helper is not finding all the answers. The helper is not telling the person how to do X, Y, and Z, and that if you need this done, well, you have to do it this way, and these are the things that you need to do to resolve whatever situation. But more so they're to help guide that person so that they can find the answers on their own within themselves as much as possible. And then, sort of like when that relationship ends, then understanding that yes, we received the help and we gave the help and it's over, versus someone becoming really dependent on the helper and that helper then gaining the sort of power dynamics where the helper is the only person that's able to do or help with this certain task, and then the person becomes dependent on the helper, and then the relationship sort of gets exploited in that way. So I just thought that was really interesting, that it was both people are entering with this mutual agreement and then understanding what that is, and then ultimately the person who wants the help is working to try to find those answers on their own versus being told what they needed to do.
The importance of the disability rights movement and the advocacy movement, how far we've gone, because here's, at least if I think about the population of people with intellectual disabilities, the era of institutionalization is not that long ago. A lot has been changed, not everything. I mean, there is still some mentality which is quite institutional. There has been quite some change happening. I also want to sort of go back just briefly to when you asked about ally. I really am interested in learning more and more. How do we learn, or how can we hear the needs of people with profound intellectual disabilities? People might not be able to speak, move, etc. And in that sense, the ally, being an ally is so important, because many people, people can communicate in different ways, right? I think also someone who cannot move, cannot speak, can still communicate. I'd like to learn more and more, though, how to better hear, because it's not always an easy thing, but it's an important thing, And I think being an ally for people with profound intellectual disabilities, with people that cannot speak for themselves, it's really important. And often they're not really talked about. They're kind of forgotten, which is a pity,
And they're humans, and they exist, and they're people, and they have wants and desires and feelings that people
And
have because they're
experiences.
human. And yes,
Mhm.
well, yes, and the experience and having that be very difficult to communicate to people, sort of what those needs and desires are. I'm also thinking sort of in this relationship that we have when we are working on being an ally, sort of exploring, are there things that are important to really understand about ourselves as we're taking on being an ally role? I know one of them was sort of understanding the power differential dynamic that could exist and being really mindful of that. Are there other types of things that are important to know within ourselves in order to be effective allies?
There are so many different ways of being an ally, so it's a bit difficult. For example, somebody might have a friend with a disability and their friend tells them that, the city is not accessible. So they might join into being an ally for accessibility, which is great. Some other people might know even more about disability issues in general. So they might actually study them and they might actually inform themselves about all different kinds of issues. So I think there can be different ways of becoming an ally that it's hard right now to just think of, advice for all, so to speak.
For everybody. Oh, yeah.
I think it's important to always hear the experience of people with disabilities and to give space to that, not imposing one's understanding on it, but to really make space. So, like, what is your experience? To try to understand it, to hear what the needs are, so that you can be, an informed ally.
Hearing and giving the space in order to listen. And I love that aspect of not interjecting. I think that goes back to that helping model too. I was trying to explain there that not just providing answers, but really helping to hear and understand and give space for someone to share what their needs are. And maybe their needs aren't what an ally thinks that their needs should be. So I think that that's really important too. Also, can you explain a little bit more of different roles of allies? So I know the one that you had mentioned was helping to advocate for a more accessible city, whether that be like bus stops that are more accessible or T-stops that are more, metro train stops that are more accessible. What are other ways that people can be allies?
Oh, well, just some that come to mind. Standing up against bullying when people with intellectual disabilities, are being bullied, to stand up and speak out for people with disabilities. So, for example, bringing in disability issues and disability discourses into everyday conversation. Disability issues are really, in some way, they are about us all in different ways. In one way, I was saying before how disability can be a fluid identity. In other words, anyone might experience a physical disability or an intellectual or whatever at some point in their lives. So disability issues are not just about them, the group of people with disability, but they can actually, they affect us all. At the same time, they're about us all because at least the social model of disability, which is a sort of way of looking at disability that emphasizes the social and structural barriers that people with impairments face. Well, the social model says that disability in some way is created by oppressive social and structural barriers. And therefore, we should all ask ourselves that question, how can we change our social structures and contexts so that they become more enabling? So really bringing disability issues into many conversations is a way of being an ally already. It's like these issues matter. Yeah, and then there is, many other ways. Even just, speaking about friendships of experiences that people might have had with disability, with people with disabilities. Sometimes it can be as simple as that. Of course, participating in disability causes, politics, etc. So many different levels.
The politics also makes me think about, again, we should be mindful on all things related to politics, especially with bills and policies that are being written, but really understanding how laws right now, especially with healthcare, because that's something that's always in dynamic here in the United States, and that looking at how those policies, whether that's granting access or limiting access or sort of capping reimbursements or things like that, how that really is impacting people with disabilities and the services that they're able to access. And then also knowing that if people at any point, like you had said, could encounter disability in their own lives, and then those policies are then impacting them too. So it really is all of us. I think that's something to be really mindful of too, really understanding what reimbursement looks like. Well, wonderful. We also want to be mindful of your time too. Is there anything that's we didn't talk about that is really important to talk about or that you'd like to share?
Well, it's really interesting how to also engage into intercultural dialogue in regards to disability. I just taught a course on theology of disability, this one, and now I started one on disability studies and introduction. Anyway, to have students from all over the world and their own cultural experience of disability is quite interesting. I think sometimes, at least, I have a doctorate in disability studies, which is a discipline that has developed quite a bit in the Western world. I mean, I don't have an answer. It's a question, and teaching this course has helped me become aware of it more. How do we engage in multicultural dialogue? I mean, we can, but when people might have very different cultural understandings of disability and becoming an ally, to people with disabilities and recognizing our own cultural frameworks that we operate in. Questions are so important. Being in touch with the questions sometimes may lead you into the answer.
Yeah.
Just already,
Yes, I agree.
because often we think we have to solve or find the answer, but sometimes just knowing what the question is moves us in the direction,
Absolutely. When I think about that in a cultural context too, in different courses that I've taken, it's important to not sort of try to go in and implement things that are going to change a culture, right? And that we are appreciating and respecting the cultures that we all are living in. But then how can we also ensure that the culture is supportive and respectful of all people within the culture? I think is hard too, to sort of piece through all of that, and that disability looks very different in lots of different cultures, with saying culture 5 times in the same sentence. And knowing that different sort of groups explain disability differently and correlate different things to disability as well. And whether that's a heavily religious component or whether that's a heavily sort of like guilt component or whether that's a pride component. And that looks differently. So looking at someone who is in a Western culture studying disability and trying to really promote and prideful of people with disability, to help find others in other cultures access their pride too. That's a big question.
In speaking about empowerment, in speaking about helping remove disabling barriers, how there can be such a, yes, that makes sense kind of thing across cultures, So I think, yes, there are cultural differences, but also there is I think a human sense about what is just and what is not, And then, cultures are different, but at the same time, we're all human, So I think if we can connect at that level, how can we live more humanely and how can we help people live more humanely?
Right.
I think we can connect across cultures there,
That reminds me of something I wrote in my journal when I was on my exchange student trip. And I know that Italy and the United States are both sort of Western cultures. But one thing I wrote was that people are laughing and crying here right now at the same time that I'm laughing and crying, and that I don't speak Italian and I don't know the movie that they're talking about, but I can still connect with people on a very human level and laugh and cry with people, even though I don't know the larger context of what's happening, but I still feel it. I still feel that this is a really excited moment and someone is really happy, so I can still connect on that level of being happy with someone. And on the flip side too, being angry with someone, being sad with someone, being excited or any of these other emotions, we're still humans and people feel them. Cross cultures, cross disabilities, cross, yes, all of those things. And that we can connect on that human level.
There is a beauty about presence, beyond words, beyond ideas. I've actually just written a book called I Believe in You. This has stayed with me so much that I've included at the end of the book as a sort of, epilogue. I was in a large home and at a certain point I was watching a cartoon with a core member because he liked that cartoon. And, so that was nice. And watch the cartoon, etc. And then I see books by my side. There was a bookshelf or something. I pick up a book. I start reading it. And he touches the book and closes it. I really thought, the importance of being present, beyond words and ideas and one more book and, watching the cartoon together, that's fine enough, Presence is really important.
Presence in that human experience and listening and hearing and opening up that space. Those are all really beautiful things.
And maybe that helps being an ally, being able to connect to people's experiences and their needs is really valuable.
Yeah. Oh, that was wonderful. Well, great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Luca. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's been a really wonderful conversation. I'm so excited.
I could stay here hours. We can go hours.
Oh my gosh, forever.
Here it's nighttime though. So
oh, that's wonderful. Oh, wonderful. All right.
Great. Thank you so much though for your hospitality, for making space so that I could share some of the experience. I'm glad you wanted to hear it, and thank you for doing this needed podcast,
We want to give special thanks to our network, Public House Media, for our intro beats, Jason Barnes at Cybernetics, for our logo art, Patrice, you can find him at normalpersons.com, and Matt Meldrum and Ryan Louie, our two-handed technical team. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or publichousemedia.org. Follow us on Twitter at DisarmDisable. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Disarming Disability, and check out our website, disarmingdisability.com. See you next week. Bye.